My name is Marina Caldwell, and I'm 34 years old. We were 15 minutes into what should have been a harmless family dinner when my father said it. Right after the roast came out, and someone made a lazy comment about the gravy being too thick, the kind of conversation where no one really listens but everyone nods anyway, just to keep the peace. That fake peace. The kind I grew up practicing until it felt like breathing. My daughter was sitting next to me swinging her legs, one shoe half off. She'd waited all night for dessert because she'd seen the cake box when we arrived and whispered chocolate like it was a secret code. So when my cousin brought it out and started cutting slices, she reached forward with both hands like a 4-year-old does, completely unaware that adults were about to ruin the moment. He gave her a small piece, balanced it on her plate like treasure, smiled. And then my father, sipping his wine with that self-satisfied smirk I grew up hating but learned to ignore, said it out loud, loud enough for everyone to hear. Only legitimate grandkids get a slice of the cake. The room didn't go silent immediately. There were a couple awkward chuckles. Someone cleared their throat. It took a second for the words to land, but they landed right in front of a little girl holding a fork and trying to figure out why no one else was smiling anymore. My daughter lowered her plate. Not dramatically, not with tears, just a small, confused movement, like she suddenly didn't know if she was allowed to want what she'd been given. Something in my chest went tight. I looked at my mother. She didn't even blink, like she'd heard it before and agreed, like it was obvious. My brother suddenly got very interested in his phone. My cousin stared at their plate, and my husband, he just stared at my parents. Not angry, not shocked, focused, like he'd finally found the exact line they'd been inching toward for years. Then he stood up. Not slowly, not dramatically, just like he'd had enough. He tapped his glass once with the handle of his fork. The sound echoed too loud for such a small gesture. And then he said it. If you don't consider my daughter your granddaughter, then you're no longer part of this family's business. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. And if you're wondering if that includes the money you've been receiving weekly, he continued, voice calm as ice, yeah, that ends tonight. My mother's head snapped up like she was about to speak, but he cut her off before her mouth even opened. I'm not going to stand here and watch you humiliate a child, he said. You've been pretending for long enough. You don't love her. You've made that clear, so you don't get to benefit from us anymore. Then he sat down, poured himself some water, calm as hell. And for the first time in my life, my father had nothing to say. I wish I could tell you that moment felt powerful, freeing, like some long-awaited victory. But mostly it felt like something broke, something I'd been duct taping together for years. I'd made excuses for them, defended them to my husband, told him they'd come around, that they just needed time, that they didn't mean it the way it sounded. But they always meant it. They never saw my daughter as mine. They barely saw her at all. And for what? Biology. When I married my husband, I didn't do it for some fantasy. I did it because I loved him and I loved her. It wasn't complicated until my parents made it that way. What they didn't know was that the $700 they'd been getting every week wasn't from some mystery account. It was from me, more accurately, from my husband through me. He never minded, never questioned it. I told him my parents were struggling, and he just said, do what you need to do. They never thanked him, never acknowledged him. They just expected it like they were owed. Well, now they weren't. After the dinner, I put my daughter in the back seat and strapped her in. She was sleepy by then, not really understanding what had happened, but even at 4, she could feel something was wrong. I kissed her forehead and told her I was proud of her, even though she hadn't done anything wrong, even though she shouldn't have needed comforting for wanting cake. When we got home, I poured a glass of wine and sat in silence. I knew my phone would buzz. I knew there would be angry messages, calls, accusations. They'd say I was ungrateful. They'd say I betrayed them. They'd say I let my husband control me. But the truth was, they'd never respected me. Not as a mother, not as a wife, not as a person. And now they were about to learn what it meant to lose the one person who kept throwing them a lifeline. The messages started before we even pulled into our driveway. First came my mother. So now your husband makes decisions for both of you. Then another a few minutes later. You really think cutting off your parents makes you a hero? It just proves how far gone you are. My father didn't waste time either. You owe us more than you realize. And then the real gem. We'll talk soon, just you and us, without him in your ear. I stared at the phone in my hand. Then I put it face down on the kitchen counter and didn't pick it up again that night. My daughter was asleep within 10 minutes of getting home. She had no idea what any of it meant, but her little face looked tense, even in sleep, like her body had stored the confusion. My husband didn't say anything while he tucked her in. When he came back downstairs, he poured us both a drink and sat beside me in silence. We didn't need to talk about it. It was already decided. What my parents didn't know was that I'd already stopped the auto payment before dessert was even finished. My hands were shaking under the table while I logged in on my phone, canceled the transfer, and stared at the confirmation screen like it would change something about how I felt. It didn't. I told myself maybe they'd cool off after a few days. Maybe they'd realize they went too far and apologize, or at least back down long enough to pretend they had. But deep down, I knew better. Because people like my parents don't apologize when they're wrong. They escalate until you fold. And as I sat there in the quiet of my kitchen, listening to the house settle, I realized something that made my stomach turn. They weren't done. They were just getting started. By Monday morning, the tone changed. Sunday had been all outrage, sharp texts, voice messages that started angry and ended wounded, like they wanted me to call just to make them feel better. I didn't respond to any of it. I went to work. I packed my daughter's lunch. I tried to move through the day like my entire childhood hadn't cracked open at the dinner table. That's when the emails started. The first one was from my mother. The subject line read, "Let's not throw away family." It was short, almost gentle. She wrote that emotions had been high, that things were said that didn't need to be said, that we should all take a breath and move forward. She ended it with, "We're still your parents." An hour later, another email arrived. This one was longer, more careful. She wrote about how families survive hard moments by choosing forgiveness, how she hoped I wouldn't let my husband's reaction define the future of our relationship, how I'd changed since getting married. Changed. That word sat in my chest like a stone. I didn't reply. By that afternoon, the softness was gone. The next email landed like a slap. "You're not her real mother. You shouldn't be pretending you are." I read it twice to make sure I hadn't imagined it. Then a third time, slower. Something inside me cracked open in a way that felt both painful and clarifying, like finally realizing the thing you've been trying not to see has been standing in front of you the entire time. My father followed up a few hours later with a longer message. He used words like bloodline, betrayal, responsibility. He framed it like a lecture, like I was still a teenager who'd disappointed him. Near the bottom, buried under paragraphs of moral superiority, was a line that didn't sit right. "Things will get difficult if you don't fix this." It wasn't a direct threat. My parents never did direct. They preferred their menace vague, dressed up as concern, so you'd scare yourself filling in the blanks. I didn't respond. I blocked their numbers, deleted the emails. Then, before I could second-guess myself, I forwarded everything to my husband. I didn't need to explain it. I just needed him to see it. That night, when he read through the messages, I watched his face change. Not anger, focus. He looked up at me and said, "They don't want reconciliation." I nodded. "They want access." "Money," he said. "Control," I added. He exhaled once, slow. "Then we stop pretending this is emotional." The next morning, the receptionist at his office emailed me. "Your father came by asking to speak with your husband. He said it was urgent family business." Security escorted him out. Apparently, my father hadn't yelled. He hadn't caused a scene. He'd stood there like he belonged, telling the receptionist he was family, that this was important. When she asked what the meeting was about, he said, "He'll know. It's about the money." That was the moment it stopped being theoretical. That night, my husband texted me one sentence. "He's not coming near my building again. Security has his photo." I sat in our backyard alone after that, the air cool, the house quiet. I thought about the version of myself who would have apologized by now. The woman who would have called her parents and begged them to just accept my daughter a little, enough to keep the peace. That version of me didn't exist anymore. They didn't whisper their cruelty behind closed doors. They said it with cake on the table and 20 people watching. They wanted a public win. They got a public fallout. 2 days later, my cousin Josh called. He sounded uncomfortable, like he didn't want to be involved, but couldn't stay silent. "I thought you should know," he said. "Your mom's telling people your husband made you block them. She's saying he's controlling you, that he's isolating you by cutting off the money." My stomach tightened. Who did she tell? Aunt Marie, a couple others. She even said he's abusive. I didn't interrupt him. I let him finish, thanked him. Then I hung up, and something shifted for good. This wasn't about hurt feelings anymore. This was war. The next voicemail from my mother was syrupy, slow. "I think we all said things we didn't mean," she said. "Let's get back to normal. Call me." An email followed. The subject line read, "Rebuilding Trust." It was 2 paragraphs of half apologies, most of which blamed my husband. She wrote that they were willing to let go of the drama, if I was ready to admit the dinner had gotten out of hand. She reminded me of everything they'd done for me growing up, how much they'd sacrificed. I stared at the screen and felt something close to calm. I had changed. I'd grown a spine. And that was what they couldn't stand. After 2 weeks of silence from me, the tone flipped again. Cold, aggressive. My father wrote that cutting them off financially was reckless, that I had a moral debt to them for raising me, that they were now at risk of losing their home because of my emotional outburst. Then he wrote the line I couldn't forget. You were nobody before us, remember that. And near the bottom, the same warning, sharpened just enough. Don't force us to come for what we're owed. I forwarded the email to my husband. For the first time since the dinner, I saw something different in his eyes. Not rage, calculation. He said one thing. Let's make sure they can't touch anything. Over the next 48 hours, we moved fast. Our financial advisor reviewed every account. Anything I'd ever co-signed, we closed or transferred. I pulled my name off the utilities I'd helped them get approved for when their credit was shot, canceled the shared grocery card, logged out of the streaming services they'd been using like they belonged to them. Then I called a lawyer, not to start a legal war, but to create a paper trail, just in case. 3 days later, the doorbell rang. A woman stood there, holding a clipboard, wearing a badge. Child Protective Services. She said someone had filed an anonymous report claiming our daughter was living in an unstable environment, that her biological mother had passed, and the woman raising her, me, was not legally fit, that the father might be manipulative and financially abusive. She used those words exactly. Words I had read in my parents' emails. I let her in. There was nothing to hide. She walked through our kitchen, peeked into the living room. My daughter was coloring at the table, humming to herself. She looked up, smiled, held up her drawing of a blue giraffe, and said, "This is for Mommy." The worker's eyes flicked to me. She nodded, scribbled something down, asked a few basic questions, and left. At the door, she paused and said quietly, "This happens when people feel like they're losing control." She didn't need to say more. That night, I sat on the floor of my daughter's room, watching her sleep, her stuffed giraffe tucked under her chin, cheeks soft and peaceful. And I knew something with absolute certainty. My parents had crossed a line they could never uncross. After the CPS worker left, the house felt different. Not violated, clarified. There's a moment after something truly ugly happens when your body stops shaking and your mind finally catches up. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the half-finished drawing my daughter had left behind. A blue giraffe with crooked legs, my name written above it in uneven letters. Mommy. That was the word my parents tried to erase. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I felt cold in a way that was strangely steady, like whatever fear I'd been holding on to for years had finally burned itself out. My husband came in quietly and sat across from me. He didn't ask if I was okay. He already knew the answer. They did this, I said. He nodded once. I know. They used a government agency, I added, my voice flat, against a child. He reached across the table and took my hand. His grip was firm, grounding. Then we stopped treating them like family and start treating them like a threat. That night, we didn't argue about what to do next. We moved. He changed the home's security codes, installed cameras at every entry point. I emailed the daycare director personally, attaching legal language that clearly stated my parents were not permitted to have access to my daughter under any circumstances. I followed it with a call to her pediatrician's office to do the same. Then I called the lawyer again. I want documentation, I said. I want a record. If they try anything else, I don't want ambiguity. There was no hesitation on the other end of the line. They're not going to like this, he warned. I'm counting on it, I said. The cease and desist letter went out the next morning. Courier delivery, signature required. My father signed for it himself. For the first time since the dinner, I thought maybe that would be enough. Not because they'd reflect or apologize, but because bullies usually retreat when they realize there are consequences. I was wrong. 2 hours after the delivery confirmation came through, my phone buzzed with a security alert. Movement detected at the front gate. I opened the camera feed. It was my father. He stood there holding a large envelope, not looking at the door, not pressing the bell, just standing like a man placing a bet he thought he'd already won. He set the envelope down carefully on the gate post and walked away without a word. I waited until he was gone before I went outside. The letter inside was typed, formal, carefully worded in a way that made my skin crawl. He claimed my daughter was not my real child and therefore had no legitimate connection to the family name. He wrote that my husband had manipulated me into compliance and that my bloodline was now at risk. Then came the line that changed everything. We are prepared to challenge the legitimacy of your role as a mother if you force our hand. I read it twice. Then I folded it neatly and placed it in the folder I'd already started labeling evidence. That was the moment hope died. Not the hope that they'd change. The hope that I could ever feel conflicted again. That night, my brother called. His voice was low, urgent. I think Mom and Dad are planning something. I didn't interrupt him. They're telling people they'll fix this before the holidays, he said. Dad was on the phone with an attorney. He kept saying things like probate leverage and biological legitimacy. My jaw tightened. He told Uncle Ray, "You're only the face of the business now," my brother continued, "that your husband has the real control. He thinks if he pushes hard enough, he can still get back in." I closed my eyes. "Don't tell them I called," my brother said quickly. "Please." "I won't," I said. After the call, my husband and I went to the bedroom closet and pulled out the fireproof lockbox we'd kept hidden for years. Inside were documents we'd never thought we'd need to defend. Shareholder agreements, power of attorney paperwork, and the adoption papers we'd quietly finalized a month after we got married. We hadn't told many people about the adoption. The original birth certificate still listed her biological mother, out of respect. But legally, undeniably, I was her mother. No one could undo that. Not my parents. Not a court. Not a threat typed on cheap paper. The cease and desist had barely landed, and they were already escalating. So we stopped waiting. The next call we made wasn't defensive. It was strategic. The next morning we moved before fear had a chance to catch up. Not out of panic, out of clarity. My husband made the calls while I organized the documents. The lawyer, the financial advisor, the board liaison. The people who didn't deal in feelings or history, only authority and signatures. For years, my parents had leaned on one assumption, that I wouldn't go all the way. That I'd stop just short of irreversible. That guilt would slow my hand. They were wrong. By noon, a special board meeting was scheduled. Quiet, efficient, no drama. The family business had long stopped being a family project in any meaningful sense. My parents had helped start it decades ago, but they hadn't lifted a finger in over 10 years. My father still clung to the title of honorary founder, a symbolic label with no power, no shares, no vote. A relic. That afternoon, with a unanimous vote, the title was removed. Legally, publicly, permanently. The locks on the office building were changed the same day. A formal statement went out to employees clarifying the separation, neutral in tone but unmistakable in meaning. No ambiguity, no room for reinterpretation. Then we made one final change. We renamed the company, not after ourselves, not out of ego, but after our daughter, her middle name actually. Quiet, elegant, strong. A name that didn't shout, didn't beg for approval. A name that would outlast every threat my parents could make. The new sign went up within a week. The first time my father saw it, he showed up at the office. This time he didn't get past the lobby. And this time, no one escorted him out. They ignored him. No raised voices, no confrontation, no recognition at all. He stood there for several minutes, looking around like a man who'd walked into a room that used to belong to him and realized the furniture had been rearranged without his permission. Then he left. For a moment, I thought that might finally be it. I should have known better. The silence that followed didn't feel like surrender. It felt like strategy. A week passed, maybe 9 days. Then the emails started, not to us, but to vendors, old suppliers, former clients, people loosely tied to the business. One vendor forwarded us a message asking if there had been a change in leadership because someone claiming to be the founder had warned them the company was in dispute. We knew exactly who it was. My father had resurrected the title we'd stripped away and was using it like a weapon, telling people there was fraud, that I was mentally unstable, that my husband was manipulating everything behind the scenes. Character assassination, clean and simple. We corrected the record quickly, calmly, legally. The story unraveled fast. But the next blow didn't come through business. It came through my daughter. One morning, just as I was tying my shoes to take her to daycare, the director called. Her voice was tight. 2 people came by earlier, she said. A man and a woman. They said they were your daughter's grandparents and that you'd given permission for them to pick her up. My hands went cold. They're not on the release list, she continued quickly, so we turned them away, but they thought she'd be here today. She wasn't. They didn't know that. I hung up and called our lawyer before I even finished tying the laces. That was no longer manipulation. That was interference. By that afternoon, we had a formal no-contact order filed. Copies went to the daycare, her pediatrician, our security company. Clear language. no loopholes. If either of them came near her again, they wouldn't be dealing with lawyers. They'd be dealing with police. My husband stayed outwardly calm that night, but he still changed every lock in the house. Then came their final move. 2 days later, we were served. My parents were suing us. Not for custody, not for defamation, for emotional and financial damages. They claimed I had abandoned my duties as a daughter, that publicly removing their names from the business caused irreparable humiliation, that the $700 a week had established dependency, and that cutting it off was unlawful. I laughed when I read that part. They really believed that after everything, the CPS report, the daycare stunt, the slander, they could still squeeze something out of us. The suit didn't survive long. There was no merit. It was dismissed before it ever reached a hearing. But it confirmed what I already knew. They weren't trying to fix anything. They were trying to win. And if they couldn't win quietly, they'd burn everything down just to feel powerful one last time. That was when I decided to stop protecting the illusion for everyone else. I didn't announce anything publicly. No social media posts. No dramatic statements. No vague quotes about boundaries or healing. Instead, I did something far more uncomfortable. I told the truth. I booked a small community room. Not fancy, not intimidating, and sent a simple message to the relatives who'd spent months asking why I'd gone quiet, why I'd cut my parents off, why things felt so tense. No accusations, no pressure. Just, if you want to understand, come. Most of them did. Aunts, uncles, cousins, even my brother, who'd gone silent after warning me weeks earlier. They sat in folding chairs, coffee cups in hand, uncertain, braced for drama. I didn't give them drama. I gave them receipts, emails, the cease and desist, the letter left on our gate, the daycare incident report, screenshots from the CPS visit timeline, security camera footage showing my father placing that envelope like a threat wrapped in politeness. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just laid everything out in order, like evidence in a case file. When I finished, I said one sentence. I'm not asking you to hate them. I'm asking you to stop asking me to forgive them. No one argued. No one defended them. A few people looked sick. I stood up and walked out before anyone could try to soften it, reinterpret it, or bargain it into something more comfortable. That night, my brother texted me. Just 2 words. About time. The next morning, I woke up to 5 missed calls from my mother. I didn't listen to the voicemails. I deleted them before they finished downloading. Then I blocked every number they'd ever used. Not out of anger. Out of finality. I didn't feel proud. I didn't feel victorious. I felt clean, like I'd finally cut away something rotten instead of wrapping it tighter and calling it love. Stop! Part 6. The quiet that followed. It's been 4 months now. 4 months since I blocked their numbers. 4 months since the last threat, the last lie, the last attempt to claw their way back into my life. I won't pretend it's been perfect. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I still think about them, not with longing, not even with love, but with a strange emptiness, like realizing a place you used to visit no longer exists. I remember the softer memories sometimes. My dad bringing me candy from the gas station, my mom humming while she washed dishes. The things that make it harder to accept who they became. But then I remember a 4-year-old holding a fork, staring at a plate of cake she was told she didn't deserve, and the ache disappears. My brother still keeps me updated, carefully. He says our parents haven't stopped trying to rewrite the story. How I turned on them, how my husband manipulated me, how they were forced out of their own business. They never mentioned the CPS report, the daycare attempt, the threats. My mother even tried sending a birthday card last month. Inside was $50 and a note that said, "From Grandma, always here if you need us." I never saw it. My brother threw it away before I could. They're not done, he told me. They just don't know they've already lost. And he was right. They didn't just lose access to money or control over a business. They lost me. The daughter who twisted herself into knots to make them proud. The woman who believed loyalty meant sacrifice, even when it cost her peace. They'll never meet the woman I became the day I chose my child over their pride. My husband never asked me to choose. He just stood there, steady, while I worked through the grief of realizing my parents never really saw me. Not as a mother, not even as a person. And my daughter, she keeps drawing pictures. One she taped to the fridge last week had 3 stick figures. A tall one with glasses, a smaller one with long brown hair, and a tiny one in a pink dress. Above it, in messy handwriting, she wrote, "My family. No one missing. Not a single spot saved." That's when I knew I didn't just protect her. I protected us. I ended a cycle she'll never have to live through. And that's the legacy I'll take over anything my parents ever gave me.